Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I did not put out videos this last week because we were on a little spring vacation. We took a van and we camped for a few nights by a lake. It was so beautiful. We slept with the windows open so we could hear the crickets and feel the breeze and the birds in the morning and campfire smell and all of that. So it was really, really wonderful. But I'm happy to be back with you all. And in case you're wondering, my shirt says heavily meditated, which is funny. This is an old shirt. Dick Schwartz talks about how sometimes a firefighter could even use meditation to basically get higher than the flames of our exiles. And so, it's a play on heavily medicated, but it's funny because meditation can even be a very soothing, well-meaning firefighter as well. All right, so today I'm going to give you another sample session. There's only a couple more. Can you believe it? In Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt by Martha Sweezy. And in this example, this is another example of Martha working with a client around grief. And in the IFS practitioner monthly group that I lead, we've been talking a lot about IFS and grief and kind of the parts that come out around it. Derek Scott talks about there kind of being these clusters of grief parts and restoration parts that kind of toggle back and forth in what he calls simple grief. Grief is never simple, it's never light or anything like that. But when our system is somewhat healthy, it will toggle back and forth between allowing the grief space to breathe and be expressed, and then kind of the manager parts that help the system have some restoration function in everyday life will kind of come back in and out like this. And when our grief gets complicated, there can be all kinds of reasons why grief can be complicated, but usually we'll get stuck in the grief cluster and just have a really difficult time functioning for a very long time. Or we might get stuck in the restoration cluster, and which will essentially exile our grieving parts and not allow us to have access to our grief. And so those parts are kind of desperate and running the show from beneath deck in a sense. So I'm excited to tell you this example today about a client named Hazel. And first, Martha says, kind of like I was just saying, exiles lurk on the back burner of consciousness, another way to say it, unacknowledged, yet coloring our mood and influencing our behavior. Endings provide an opportunity for them to break into consciousness. Yeah, so often, sometimes when we have a loss, a current loss, it can open the door for parts who had losses in the past that were never expressed, that might have been exiled, to come forward. They kind of ride the coattails of the current grief. And so sometimes the pain that you feel with a current loss is actually compounded by past losses that you've experienced. But it can actually be a really valuable opportunity once you learn how to turn toward whatever's alive in you with curiosity and compassion, to allow space, breathing room, even designating times each day to allow it to come up to the surface. I often liken it to a pressure cooker, right? Where it's just been pressed and pressed and pressed down, and we can choose to release the valve on the pressure cooker and just let some of that pain come out, be released in tears, in groans, in shaking of the body, in just allowing the heaviness of the grief to be with us for a certain period of time. We can even, negotiate with our managers, with that restoration team, set a timer for how much time they'll allow that to happen. Sometimes, we really want to, it's a system inside, so we want to consult all the parts about when and how long, and give them freedom and free will to decide together. We don't want to leave any parts out in that process. But all right, here's an example. Hazel's grief. Hazel was a 49-year-old cisgender heterosexual partnered Scottish English American therapist. She started therapy because she was in training to learn IFS. Yay. And she wanted the IFS experience, which I highly recommend if you want to. Dick Short says you can only go as far in another person's system as you've gone in your own. And so the most important thing you can do in learning IFS is experiencing it in your own system. If you're able to do that on your own, that's wonderful. If not, that's okay too. Just experiencing it with a practitioner yourself is a great way to learn IFS. Because you want to know it. You don't want to just know it up here intellectually. You want to know it in your experience. Okay, so Hazel's adverse childhood experiences included some bullying experiences with peers and her parents' divorce when she was 9. Additionally, her mother was now in poor health and would die soon. This session occurred shortly before her mother's death. So Hazel says, "My mother is 88 years old and her quality of life is poor. Her life is over. I know that, but it's hard." So Martha says, "What do you notice?" And Hazel says, "I dread pulling a tissue out of a Kleenex box because it might be the last one, and the feel of the empty box would be unbearable." Yeah. "I dread finishing a roll of toilet paper, or getting to the bottom of a jar of peanut butter, or pouring out the last bit of milk. I never realized how many things end every day." Oh, this is such a beautiful example of this part or her system, kind of being reminded of the reality of endings, losses, at least in this realm, right? And it just a little side story. I told this in the IFS practitioner group last month, but I remember many years ago, my cousin died by suicide. And for whatever reason, in order to survive, my parts organized to not allow me to grieve or process his death. And, a few months afterward, I had gotten a library book that I really loved, and I wanted to take it back to the library to recheck it out, but I could not find it anywhere. I scoured my whole house, I scoured my car, I could not find my library book. And I remember having a complete meltdown tantrum at my car where I just was basically screaming and crying and saying, "How can something be here one moment and not be here the next? How?" And I was just so beside myself, distraught. And I realized in that moment that it wasn't about the library book. It was about my cousin. And it was just this existential realization that things come to an end, or things can be here. A life can be here one moment and be gone the next. And that was such an incredibly difficult reality for my system to process, to handle. So again, sometimes some of these smaller endings, smaller losses can be a doorway into processing the grief of bigger things. Okay. So Hazel is explaining every time there's an end to the milk, the toilet paper, she has this crisis. And Martha says, "How do you feel for the part of you who feels this dread?" Good question. So Martha's trying to have her do a U-turn and check for self-energy. Hazel says, "I feel overwhelmed." Martha says, "Could you help if it's willing to give you some space?" So sometimes when a client says they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling, often the system is feeling overwhelmed, blended, taken over by the part who is feeling the dread, because the dread is an overwhelming feeling. other times there's parts who feel overwhelmed by the dread. So it sounds like Martha thinks it's the part taking over. So she says, you could help if it's willing to give you space. So you're always asking, you're never making parts give you space or unblend. You're saying, if you're willing, I can help you, right? Or the client self can help you. And so Hazel says, I hear inside, what's the point? And Martha says, of what? What's the point of what? Hazel shrugs and says, life. And Martha says, have you heard that inside before? Hazel says, I don't pay attention. And Martha says, would this part that's feeling this kind of existential dread like to have your attention? Hazel says, I guess so, which sounds like she's blended with this other part, but Martha says, is it okay to pay attention now? Hazel nods, and Martha says, where do you find it? After a pause, Hazel says, up a canyon. Interesting. Martha says, how do you feel toward it? I just want to pause there for a second. It's interesting, this question, where do you find it? Because often the question is, where do you feel it? Like, where do you experience it in or around your body? And Martha asked it in such a general way, where do you find it? And sometimes parts can exist visually especially when they're exiled in like very remote places, in a cave or at the bottom of the ocean or something like that. So I kind of like the general way that Martha says, where do you find it? Because she says it's up a canyon. And Martha again is checking for self energy, says, how do you feel toward it? And Hazel says, dread. There's a rope coming out of the canyon toward me with a tick crawling on it. The tick is a messenger, but it disgusts me, and I don't want to hear the message. I know I keep making side notes, but this is interesting because some people, not everyone visualizes, but some people do. And if you don't visualize, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you whatsoever. We experience our parts in different ways, just different sensory ways. Sometimes people will not see things, but they'll say they have a knowing. I know that this part likes this song. I know that this part has red curly hair or something like that, but they don't actually see it. And so I don't know actually if she's seeing it or not, but what's wonderful when your system can be really open to receiving, and sometimes you have to work with skeptical parts or parts that say, oh, you're making things up or it's imaginary, and just say, even if it's imaginary, can you let it come to me? And then you can decide if it's helpful or not afterward, is usually what I'll ask those parts, because if you can receive it without resistance, in my experience, every little bit is very symbolic. It's kind of like a dream where each part represents a part of you or a message that they want to tell you. So it's great that Hazel, she's probably been in therapy for a while. She's so receptive, right? There's this rope and there's a tick coming up and it's got a message, but it disgusts me. And so she says, I don't want to hear the message. And it's interesting. Martha says, what is the message? So I guess maybe she's hearing it, but she doesn't want to. So then Hazel says, it's going to say, life is pointless. And I don't want to hear that. I haven't been depressed since I was a teenager. Okay. Yeah, so we've got polarized parts here. It sounds like we've got a part that maybe Hazel knew when she was a teenager that would say these things like life is pointless, what's the use of life? And she felt very depressed around this. And so other parts likely exiled that because it felt very uncomfortable and, dark in her system. So those parts are saying, don't listen to that message. Okay. So, and then Martha says, well, what if you could help the part who's up in the canyon, right? So this one that's giving this message likely either is coming from the one in the canyon or is one that protects the one in the canyon. So what if you could help them? Hazel says, well, that would be good. Martha says, does anyone inside object? Hazel says, they think there's no point and I should just go away. And Martha asks, who do they think you are? Often when parts don't think you can do it, or they think there's, no use, they're seeing you as a young child, or they're seeing another part. They're not seeing the self. So Hazel says, they think that I'm someone who can't help. And Martha says, ask the part who can't help to stand next to you. And Hazel nods. And Martha says, do they see you now? Hazel nods. Do they object to you helping the part who's up in the canyon? Hazel says, no. Okay, this is often what happens. It's really fascinating, where the parts are genuinely seeing another part when they look at you. And so you can say, what do they see? And whatever they say, they see a part that's weak. They see a part that's doesn't have good intentions, or they see a part that's trying too hard, that's never helped before. They see a 5-year-old, whatever it is. You can say, can you have the 5-year-old, the one who's crumpled in a ball? Like, can you have them step to your side? Now, who do they see? Sometimes they'll see another part, and you can keep having the parts unblend and kind of line up. Again, it's always their choice. If they can't, then you can turn toward them. But eventually they will see the you that is, if you're doing it on your own, that is yourself, or with your client, the self that is the client. So now they think that she can do it. It sounds like they are seeing herself. So Martha says, what needs to happen? And Hazel says, I need to go up there into the canyon. That even sounds very clear and confident, right? I need to go up there. And Martha says, okay, do that. And after a pause, Hazel says, it's a 9-year-old girl with stringy hair and dirty clothes. I'm listening to her, and she's not saying, what's the point of life? She's saying, what's the point of my life? And there's a pause, and she says, I heard it wrong. This often happens too. It's like other parts are afraid of the message, and they're not really letting the self hear the message, or kind of even see or hear the parts clearly, because their purpose is to exile them or to separate them. But once the self goes, there's clarity about exactly what the part's trying to communicate, what their fears are, what their needs are. So her system thought the part was saying, what's the point of life in general? But this 9-year-old, and I believe that she was 9, yes, when her parents divorced, is saying, what's the point of my life? And Martha says, what happened to her? Hazel says, it's something about the divorce. I was 9 and she felt forgotten. Yeah. Yeah. So Martha says, how do you feel toward her, Hazel? Hazel says, I care about her. So again, this question, how do you feel toward any part, is always checking for self energy. And Hazel sounds like she's in self here. Martha says, what does she need from you? And Hazel says, she wants to come home with me. So sometimes you'll meet these parts that have been exiled essentially because they hold pain from something that happened. The memories, the heaviness, the pain, again, this belief, I am forgotten, I'm not seen, I don't matter. These burdens they've taken on that are so painful. And so other parts have, they've exiled her to this canyon. And sometimes they need you to witness how they got their pain and all of this. Other times they just want to be retrieved. They want to be taken out of there, which it sounds like this part does. She wants to come home with me. So Martha says, is that okay? Always checking for, in the system to make sure there's no objections, because if there is, then those parts will block the way or have backlash later. So we're always checking for free will in the system. Hazel says, yes, but there's a beautiful river in the canyon and we will swim there first. And that can even be a little bit of you know, an unburdening ritual often involves that one of the elements. It just makes me think in a canyon and a river, there can be something very cleansing about that. And Martha says, if she's ready, she can give her burdens to the river. So Martha again intuits that and says, oh, that might be a perfect way to unburden. Hazel says, yes, she's washing off that feeling of being forgettable. And after a pause, going inside. So as a practitioner, there's a lot of pauses. There's a lot of trust in the client's system that when they're quiet, there's always something going on. Even if it's a dissociative part that's kind of taking them out, there's always something that's going on inside. And so we can trust them. We can check in every now and then. But I found that usually if I have a part that's kind of like uncomfortable with the silence or kind of wants to know what's happening, is there anything happening? It's more of an agenda-driven part of me that just thinks, oh no, is not, and am I not leading this right? It's a part that feels like it needs to be in control, right? As the practitioner. But what I found after many, many hours with clients is that I can always trust the client system. And that when I just hold the space of my own self energy that is so patient and non-agendaed, when they are inside, there are really significant things happening for them. And they don't even have to tell me what's happening. But if they choose to, sometimes they do, and it's amazing what happens in there. So it's great. Martha's giving her space to do this unburdening ritual. And then I'll usually tell them, go in and have them release this burden to the water or to the earth, to the sun, whatever it is, and just stay with them until it's complete and let me know. All right, so Martha says, how is she now? And Hazel says she's much better. Martha says, what does she need going forward? And Hazel says she needs confidence and love. Yeah. Martha says, okay, yes, invite them in. So after an exile has released their burdens, they have space inside now to invite in new qualities that they need. Oftentimes, they're actually qualities that they had before they took on the burden, but they kind of got moved to the side. Sometimes they can take in completely new qualities, but when you can ask the part directly, what do you need? And it will tell you. They always know what they need. So then Martha has a final note that says, when she was banished, the 9-year-old felt her life was pointless. When she asked about the point of her life in banishment, Hazel's protectors heard her asking a more global question. What's the point of life? And they thought she was suicidal. Years later, they were still hearing her wrong and misjudging her feelings. Hazel could only learn that the girl was lonely rather than depressed or suicidal by paying attention to her rather than to her protectors. Yeah, it's interesting. Often protectors, they like to speak for the exiles, and they often get it a little bit wrong. So you always want to ask a part directly. If you ever want to know something about a part, ask that part directly. You can appreciate the good intentions of the parts who are trying to speak for other parts, but just ask them if they'll let you ask a part directly and receive an answer. And last thing I'll say about this is just that I really love this example because it's quite a full unburdening of an exile. It shows a lot of the steps. There's not a lot of witnessing really, and redoing, but I love how pretty quickly, Martha is questioning inside and getting permission, identifying some of the protective parts, but seeing Is it okay though if you give space? Maybe Hazel can go to the one in the canyon and there's the tick and there's the part saying this is the message that's coming, and the ones who don't like that, who've exiled her. And Martha's kind of keeps passing the baton to the self or holding out that hope to the protectors. But what if she could go? What if Hazel could go to the one in the canyon? And then of course she's blended with one who hasn't been able to do it. Once that unblends, they give permission. So then Hazel has permission from the system to go to this exiled part that was banished around the time of her parents' divorce, and holds this belief that she's forgotten and doesn't matter. And she's able to you can tell that she's in self when she's with the 9-year-old, because she's just cares about her, receives answers from her, is able to respect what she needs, and help her release her burdens. So, and again, there's not the witnessing and the redoing step are not, sometimes parts don't need that so much. Sometimes parts need it for a year or more. So it just depends, right? There might be things that she wants Hazel to know about what happened, moments that were really difficult for her in the divorce. And so she might say, I need to show you this and this and this. But in this case, she didn't. She wanted to be retrieved. They took advantage of the river canyon to do the unburdening ritual with one of the elements. And she invited in new qualities. And I imagine after this that Hazel brought the 9-year-old with her to be with her in the present. And then from then on would check in with her every day for 3 or 4 weeks, just to say, how are you doing? Do you need anything from me? I'm here with you. I'm taking care of you. And sometimes people think that that stage, the checking in, has to be, 10 minutes, an hour or something each day. And it does not. I always want to tell people that, because other parts will resist if they think it has to be this long thing, and then you end up not checking on the exile. And it's more important that you check on the exile every day, even if it's for 10 seconds. It's really can be that quick. You just go inside, ask the exile to come forward, say, hey, how are you doing? Receive whatever. Sometimes if you're visual, you can see them. If they're running and jumping and skipping and dancing, they're doing well. Other times they're slumped down and something's wrong, and you can ask them, what do you need? Is there anything you need? I'm here with you. I can help you. And sometimes they need you to just be with them and comfort them for a little while. Sometimes there's something they need you to do in the outer world. I need rest. I need wonder. Or maybe they need you to go back and witness something. That's fine. Or redo or reparent something in the past, and you can do that, or set an appointment at a time when your system is more able to do that. But it's so important to just check in, and you can set a reminder for yourself on your phone. You can attach to something you already do, like brush your teeth. You can put a picture or something that the name that the part gave you up on your mirror. And so when you walk by, you can just go, it can seriously be so quick. Hey, Sylvia, or whatever, how are you doing? Oh, I'm here with you. You can even imagine giving them a hug, holding their hand, and bringing them with you with whatever task you're about to do. But it's really about secure attachment with this part now, and then letting them kind of be reparented on a daily basis by you. All right, I hope you appreciated that example. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below.